Hello and welcome back to HEMA Fight Breakdowns. Today I want to talk about what is basically a combination of techniques, or what I would call a setup and payoff kind of flow chart. So recently I was at a tournament and I had an opponent who had a very effective little loop of techniques that they were throwing at me that were not only effective in their own right, but meshed together to form a very effective kind of flow chart of decision making. And I'd like to show that off because I think it's very effective. So we're going to see one exchange here in particular where it works very well. So that was it. And what I want people to pay attention to here is very specifically the guard that my opponent is in. So there were three things that my opponent was doing very, very well. The first was, and that's not shown in this clip, were undercuts to the bottom of the hands, where basically they would lower their tip exactly as their guard is and come back up, snap up, and cut into the hands. The other one that they did very quickly here is a very basic straight in hand cut. Now, I have to parry this despite the fact that it looks a little bit like it's, I guess you could say, like low effort, low commitment. And that's part of what makes it so effective, is that it's very hard to read what's coming. So the second you see this coming in, you sort of have to parry, not necessarily knowing what you're going to get. And when I parry, I over parry a little bit. You see here, I've already parried it here, and then I continue to push over, assuming that something else was coming, but nothing else was there. And what they do by throwing that hand cut at me is bait me into this cut, which is the second they see me lower my motion from the exact same starting position, which is very important, they come in up to the head and get a nice little Scheidel Howl right over the top of my guard, because I did the same parry as I threw before. These are the same two parries. Basically, I'm just tipping my sword up to get my hands behind my crossguard and pushing up with my sword. So where this becomes very effective isn't in the individual technique, but in working them all together. And what works so well is that, going back to earlier, is that all of these come from the exact same guard. This guard that my opponent stands in, from here, he can throw all three of those techniques with very little variation in visual input. And what that means is that every time my opponent comes into range, there are three things that I'm worried about: an undercut to the bottom of the hands, an undercut to the top of the hands, and a cut straight to the top of my head. And the reality is that I can't parry all three of them with one guard. If I put my hands all the way up in the air and go to a hanging guard, theoretically I'm perhaps removing the top of the hand parry because I'm in that hanging guard, and I'm protecting my head because it's all the way up there, but he could still undercut straight up into my hands. If I try to stay where I am in this kind of plow type guard, and I continue to try to point my tip up to defend myself from the hand shots on top and the head shots, well, I'm going to be exposing the bottom of my hands. And this is something that I advise that every single person who does competitive fencing have. And that is a series of techniques that work off of each other, that all come from the same guard, or at least the same sort of setup. And the reason for that is, you might have all the techniques in the world and you might be the best at 5, 6, 7 different techniques. But if you're not all starting them from the same kind of position, your opponent is going to know what you're going to throw based on how you're standing and before you even enter the action. Because all three of these very effective techniques from my opponent start from this exact position, I have to make a conscious choice to try to address this in three different ways, where no one way can protect me from all of them. If they were to only throw the head cut from a Vomtog and the hand cuts from here, well, I would know as soon as they entered this guard that a hand cut was coming, and I could do only one guard that would protect me from that and know exactly what's coming. So that's just a general sort of advice for everyone who's fencing. Try to pick a few techniques that you're good at and that you feel land successfully a bunch of times, and try to pick a setup that works for both of them, all three of them, all your favorite techniques. So that way, when you're facing an opponent, they will not know, based on how you enter the range of engagement, what you're going to throw. And it's going to make all three of those techniques land with far more consistency. All right, that's going to be it for today. If you'd like to see your own footage featured on the channel, feel free to send me an email at HEMAFightBreakdowns@gmail.com, and I hope to see you next time.